Ladies and gentlemen, it is a beautiful day sitting out here, kind of cloudy, but it's all good. So let's talk about vegan hypocrisy, right? Are vegans actually hypocrites? Is veganism a hypocritical stance, right? Now, you know, anybody who tries to argue against veganism, chances are you're going to say, oh, vegans are a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites, right? This is a pretty common thing, right? Vegans are self-righteous hypocrites. Vegans are such self-righteous hypocrites, right? And to be honest, right, when someone calls you out for, oh, you know, eating animal products is wrong, and they explain why, you're left with two choices. You either continue to do that thing, or you don't do that thing and do something else instead, right? If you choose to continue to do that thing that others have explained to you is wrong, you now have to rationalize and justify it. You have to defend it because you're not abandoning it, right? Or you can just say, yeah, you know, I'm going to continue doing it anyway, and I don't really care about anything or anybody but myself. You can do that, right? And I've heard people say, well, I don't value life in itself. There's people who are actually willing to actually verbalize their ideas, even though it will make them look like a sociopath, but they'd rather look like a sociopath or a complete psychopath, as long as they get to seem logically consistent, right? So being logically consistent is now more important than just being honest and doing the right thing, right? So people will just say stuff just to sound logically consistent, which is a ridiculous idea to me. There's really no growth in that. Right? You're just saying stuff that you don't even necessarily believe. You're just saying it because you don't want to seem logically inconsistent, just for the sake of you know, pulling your own weight in a debate or something. But so is veganism actually hypocritical? Are vegans just a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites? Well, let's think about it. Now, I watch some debates and stuff like that. And, you know, I've debated with people, and, you know, they say things like, oh, well, you vegans, you draw arbitrary lines between what's right and wrong. One I heard, which is pretty ridiculous, but it's been used multiple times, and people have said this to me multiple times. Why is it okay to kill a roach, but it's not okay to kill a cow? Okay. And so they said, you know, basically drawing a line between those two living beings is an arbitrary line. Now, the only way that this argument works is you have to remove the context from the situation, right? So you can say, oh, well, roaches are living beings and so are cows, so by your logic, they should both be the same thing and treated the same way. Which is ridiculous, but people employ that argument, and they have to remove a great deal of context in order to make that case. Now, here's the thing why that doesn't work, and obviously any practical or sensible human being knows there are extreme distinct differences between roaches and cows, right? Cows are not an invasive species, right? Cows will not creep into your home and lay eggs in your wall and proliferate and take over your living space and crawl in your ear and lay larvae in your ear and die in your ear and cause you health problems, right? So there are distinct differences, right? So if you see a roach in your home and you kill a roach in your home, it's really to defend your home from an infestation. Now, of course, everyone knows this or should know this, right? As sensible human beings, we should know this. So it's not really an arbitrary line because there are distinct differences, not even just between species, but behavior itself, right? There are distinct characteristics for why you would treat one a certain way and why you would treat one another way. It's obvious, right? So an argument like that, even though it's employed pretty commonly, it is ridiculous, and it's a very poor choice of an argument to use to label a vegan as a hypocrite. Now, I've also heard, well, vegans are hypocrites because they eat plant-based foods And the harvesting of plant-based foods cause the death and suffering of other living beings like insects and field rodents, right? Either they get caught in the machinery during harvesting crops, or they get sick and die from pesticides, right? So you can say, well, if you consume plant-based foods, you're participating in the death and suffering of other living beings. So you're being a hypocrite. Now again, this argument only works if you remove enough context. And the context here is plant agriculture and animal agriculture. The biggest difference between them is the fact that one needs and thrives on animal exploitation and the other one does not, right? You can't have animal agriculture without animal exploitation, right? But you can have plant agriculture without animal exploitation, right? So that's number one. Number two, there's the context of necessity. What is essential to life, right? So now here's the thing. Animal agriculture, there's really no argument for it. There's really no justification for it, right? It doesn't benefit you health-wise. It doesn't benefit you survival-wise. It doesn't benefit us environmentally, ecologically. It doesn't really benefit us at all, right? And without the government subsidies and stuff, animal products would also be extremely expensive, right? And the only way to make it cheaper is things like factory farming. So if you're buying cheap animal products, it's because it's a product of factory farming. And most people are against factory farming, right? But they like the fact that animal factory farming provides cheap animal products, like McDonald's cheeseburgers for like 79 cents or something like that, however much it is, right? So there's that. So the context between the two. The thing is that if you had plant agriculture, right, you're growing crops, whether you have animal agriculture or not, you still need crops. So you can't swap out crop farming for animal agriculture because plant agriculture is still essential, right? We need it, whether we eat animal products or not. We still need plant-based foods, right? Otherwise we're getting heart attacks in our 30s and 40s. We're getting diabetes and obesity and all this type of stuff, which we are already, right? Being that there's an obesity and diabetes and heart disease epidemic, right, in Western civilization, or just, populations all over the world that consume the most animal products, right? So there's the health impact there. So again, context. So yes, both cause death and suffering, but one doesn't imply exploitation. Now, a big part of veganism, right, or veganism basically strives to reduce and avoid animal exploitation and cruelty as much as practicably possible. Sounds pretty reasonable, right? So, is plant agriculture cruel? It causes death and suffering on a certain level, right? Is it cruel? Well, if you get sick from pesticides, that can be pretty cruel, right? So somebody told me you can cut out wheat because wheat is less land intensive. So vegans are hypocrites because they eat wheat. To this person I replied, well, I don't eat wheat, so does that mean I'm not a hypocrite now? So he says, well, it's a start. Now you got to cut out, maybe cut down on your nuts and cut down on your fruit and all this type of stuff. And so what happens is now you go down this path that leads to just this impractical appeal to futility, where no matter what you do and how much you reduce, you're still a hypocrite because you can sacrifice more to further reduce animal suffering and death. With that line of reasoning, you can say, well, I'm not going to buy a house because it requires wood, and when you cut down trees, it kills living beings and takes away their homes. And right, so you can run away with this logic to the point where you can't do anything, right? And so basically, that's why with the whole thing of veganism is you reduce and you cut back and you avoid these things as much as practicably possible. So if you're cutting back on the exploitation, you're avoiding the exploitation and the cruelty as much as practicably possible. Are you really being hypocritical? Right? So again, these types of arguments only work when you remove enough context, which is always the go-to thing, to try to blur the lines, right? Where any lines that vegans set, you say it's an arbitrary line, and then you have to remove context to try to make these two things on the opposite side of the line the same thing. You gotta do this false equivalence between the two. Now, these type of conversations, I don't really like to participate necessarily in these conversations. I've done it in the past just to see where the other side is coming from, right? Because I like to hear other people's point of view. I always try to give everybody a fair shake. Maybe I can learn something, and I'm always trying to learn. So even if you're a non-vegan and you have a point of view, I'll hear you out. My only stipulation is, if I'm going to participate in this conversation with you, I need for you to contribute something of value to the conversation, right? So, I mean, if you just call me a hypocrite because I consume plant-based foods, okay, great. Do you have a solution that you can provide me that's practical, right? If you just tell me, oh, well, you can cut this and cut that and cut, and you just draw an arbitrary line between, let's say, I don't know, wheat and rice or whatever you decide to draw a line between, it's like, okay, well, why is that not an arbitrary line? Because you're literally like just, oh, well, this one uses more land and this one uses less land. Okay, well, how much land can you use in order for it to be acceptable in your view? And there's no clear answer to this, right? So just reduce becomes impractical. Especially if you're having this conversation with someone who just hates veganism in general because they like to eat cheeseburgers and they get made to feel guilty about it. This is not a productive conversation. I wish I was a vegan ice cream truck. I can go for some ice cream right now. Yes, I eat ice cream. Right? But so yeah, you have to. I'm willing to have the conversation with you as long as you're not just trying to have the conversation just as an attempt to demonize veganism, because it's not. You can feel any type of way about vegans that you want. You can, oh, vegans are terrible, they're hypocrites, they're this and that, they're a bunch of self-righteous pricks, blah, blah, blah. That's great and all, but if you're still consuming animal products and stuff like that, if you're still funding animal exploitation, you're not adding you're not really adding anything of value. You're just contributing to the problem. And some people may think that animal agriculture and stuff is not the problem, but the fact of the matter is I've spoken to people, I kid you not, and this is extremely gross, I've spoken to people where they've lived next to factory farms and they can smell the fecal matter from the factory farms. They've had runoff from feces infested water seeping into the soil and seeping into the groundwater, contaminating the land, right? And they were so disgusted by it that they went vegan and moved, okay? This is not a problem that plant agriculture causes, right? So, and that's just one of many examples of why animal agriculture is really a problem for us as human beings. It doesn't contribute to our well-being. It actually contributes to the funding of big pharma and the sickness, right? If you've lost a family member from diabetes or heart disease, if you have to take insulin shots and all type of stuff, just understand that the root cause of that is animal product consumption. Right? And I mean, if you decide not to believe me about that, that's fine. I'm not really trying to convince anybody of anything, really. I'm just putting the information out, right? Just adding my 2 cents in, talking about the subject. And so that's pretty much it. I think that wraps it up. Now, I'm sure there's probably other ways where someone will say vegans are hypocrites. And if you feel vegans are hypocrites, right, and you have something besides comparing roaches and cows, or you have something besides butt pesticides, though, feel free to leave it in the comments, right? I'm always trying to bridge the gap, right, so that we can relate more to each other as human beings. Because not everything needs to be all polarized like this. But if you're going to argue against veganism, please provide something that is a better alternative to us as a species and to the animals, okay? If you don't like veganism, provide a better idea. Just don't demonize veganism and you have nothing better to put in its place, because that doesn't benefit anyone.